And just to let you know that for those on the call, we do record these webinars so we can make it available to the registered ticket holders post-event, including all of you. So if there's anything here you want to go back and look at or rewatch, you'll have access to that post-event. You could even Netflix binge it if you like over and over again, if that's what you're into. All right, there's a couple more coming into the room there. Kelly, if you wouldn't mind bringing them into the space. We might make a start if that's all good. I think we've got Rodney in the waiting room coming in there. All right, is everyone good? Everyone good to go? Just a thumbs up. Everyone's comfortable, ready to go? Excellent. All right, well, welcome. There we go. Yeah, so kia ora, Gingerry, and welcome to today's professional practice seminar on asset management. First of all, before we jump in, I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we collectively meet on today, and the areas of where we work and where we live, and we recognise the continuing connection to land, water and community. And I want to pay my respects on behalf of AHI in this meeting, my respects to elders past, present and emerging. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark Henderson and I'm the CEO of the Australasian Housing Institute, and I'm really looking forward to today's topic and the discussion that will ensure. We've got a great panel who are with us today, and I'm going to introduce you to them shortly. We've had a really good response, so this is clearly a topic of great interest. I just wanted to give you a bit of an understanding of how we're going to run today. First of all, there will be breaks over the couple of hours we're together, so we'll give you the opportunity to go and do that a couple of times during the conversation. We really want a lot of interaction as well with each of our speakers, so please don't be shy in sending questions through chat or using the reaction button on Zoom, which I'm sure you're all very proficient in. If there's a question you want to ask, please raise your hand and we'll come to you as best we can. Each of the panelists will be delivering a short presentation, and we'll have a Q&A session after each of those. After the group presents, we'll then move to a panel conversation, and the panel conversation is really, again, an opportunity for a lot of questions and answer from you guys to the panel members. As I said just a little bit earlier, and if you didn't hear me, we've just joined the call. The video from today's presentation will be made available post-event. Okay, so we'll send you out a link with the ability for you to watch that at your leisure. So let me introduce you to our panel. First of all, we've got Donald Proctor, and Donald's well known to many in the industry, and he's a project manager of asset management and transformation for Mission Australia. He's also the former president of the AHI, and I like to think that he's probably the best president because we don't have any of the other former president or current presidents on the call. So Donald, you can wear that hat today and we thank you so much for your support of what we do in the AHI. Donald also sits on our New South Wales branch committee, and he's a real advocate for professional development in the sector. So Donald, welcome to today's seminar.
Thanks, Mark.
Gary Sperling comes all the way from South Australia, and he is the Manager of Housing Assets and Maintenance at Anglicare South Australia. Gary has worked in Uniting Care in Victoria and previously had 16 plus years with the South Australian Government, and particularly in the Attorney General's Department in a variety of roles. So Gary, welcome to today.
Thank you.
Steve Lyons, he's the co-founder and CEO of SPM Assets, and he's recognised as a thought leader in the property asset management space. Steve has been a great supporter of AHI and has presented at many of our events over a number of years, and he's worked right across the country and in New Zealand to implement best practice asset management systems and processes. So welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Mark.
Now, lastly, we have Matthew Bales joining us today from the UK, and Matthew sent me an email overnight saying I'm going to be a little bit late because when we start the seminar today, it's 4:30 a.m. London time, which I don't think is a fair excuse to be late, to be honest. So we might mention that to Matthew when he joins. But again, Matthew's a great supporter of the sector here in Australia. He's the CEO of Paradigm Housing in the UK with 15,000 homes under management. He comes to talk about asset management and the practices of what he's seeing in UK and Europe. So he'll join us on the call in about 20 minutes. Now, I want to just do something really quickly. We're just going to throw a poll up there just so you can get, if you're in a cold climate like I am, you can get your fingers moving and warming up. Let's go to a quick poll, see what you think about that, so what you think from a sector-wide perspective. Everyone see that? Let's come up. Yep. So if you give me your thoughts on that, and I'll share the results. I feel like Anthony Green in the ABC newsroom. It's too close to call now. It's a 50-50 call at the moment on 2 questions. So I'll give you another 7 seconds of polling. 26 to the 29. Let's end the poll and let's have a look at the results. This might be good for our panelists, our speakers to have a look at as well. So 50, it's right on 50-50, too close to call, clearly. Just doing enough and rapidly evolving. So definitely something for us to share. Here you go. Now you can see it, right? So here's the results. 13 of 13, just doing enough, and then rapidly evolving, which is a little bit contradictory in itself. Anyway, let's explore that as we go through the conversation today. All right, so I don't know about you guys, but I'm based in Victoria, and we're just coming out of our 4th lockdown. So seeing people and meeting people has been something that we're not quite used to down here. I'm not sure how everyone else is faring about getting face-to-face and networking. So what we thought we'd do just today, just to start, before we jump into our first presentation, and that'll be from Donald, is we thought we'd just take a little bit of an opportunity for the people on the call to come together into some breakout rooms and just have a really brief discussion. We're talking 7 or 8 minutes discussion around introducing yourselves to each other, but also coming together with some consensus on what are the top 2 things from your group's perspective you want to take away from today. Now, there may be things on here that we will cover, and there may be things that we may not be able to cover, but we'll do our best to cover them all. And it also might be an opportunity for us to take away some of those thoughts and ideas for future sessions. So let me just start the breakout rooms. We've got 31. Kelly, I'm looking for guidance from you. 5 breakout rooms. Do you think that would suffice? 5 breakout rooms? Okay. So we're going to go with 5 breakout rooms. And I'm just going to, you can see those, Kel. I'm just double checking. You probably can't see those. Just one moment, everyone. I'm just going to take a quick snapshot of those rooms before we send you in there. So again, 7 or 8 minutes, quick introductions to the other people in the room. And then we'll come back if you guys can talk through the top 2 things you want to take away from today. And then we'll share it on the way back in. So here we go. I'm going to open all the rooms for you all. And as you see, the request to join, if you wouldn't mind joining that room, that would be phenomenal. And then we'll come back to you in about 7 or 8 minutes.
So Mark, we've just had a few new people enter the room.
Yep.
So just keep an eye and make sure these might be our participants who've just jumped on, who we can still see on screen.
Yep.
So if you want to just maybe do a bit of a brief for these guys, and then we'll allocate them into a room.
Yeah, so those people who've just joined, we're just going into a breakout room, just 7 or 8 minutes for you to introduce yourselves to each other and the other people on the call. This is our attempt to bring networking back to the sector, seeing a lot of us have been starved of that, especially those of you in Victoria. So we're just going to send you to some rooms. So Jay Burns, there we go. Let's go. Lisa sent through there. Kelsey on the way, and Theo will get you into a room. So if everyone there has been able to accept, I don't think we've got anyone who's not accepting. So Raylene, Sean, and Kelsey, if you're able to join your group. There's Sean Ashby, if you're able to join, you're in room 3, mate. If you could accept that request. There you go. Oh no, Sean. There we go.
Fantastic. Well done,
Okay.
Mark. That was great.
Yeah, that was more challenging than what I thought. So what I'll do is I'll
to help. Sorry. Lacking expertise within a smaller team, and then you've also got the organisations which have got the thousands of properties, which have probably got expertise and may be able to carve up the work differently than you would for a much smaller team. So that sort of different way of looking at your asset management maybe, or is it the same picture? Do you deal with it the same, or is it different?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you for the members of Room 4. And then the lucky last, Angelique, Dean, Steve, Theo, etc. Did you want to share your top two?
I summarised those at the end there. There's a lot of still interest in maybe confusion or questions anyway around LACPAS, whether there's still alternatives. LACPAS is the New South Wales Land and Housing Court approach to do a property assessment survey. The other one is for the smaller CHPs, having maybe a one-person type of team. How do you actually do what you need to do with small team and limited resources? Yep.
Okay, thank you, Steve. It's a bit similar to Catherine's as well. Okay, great. Well, we've captured that, Kel. We've got that. We'll find a time during our time together this afternoon to just go over those and see how we've gone with covering some of those takeaways. So the more we can get to, I think the better for everyone on this call. So thanks again. I hope that worked okay. The networking, the virtual networking as best it can. So let's get into our presentations for today. And as I said, a great contributor to the AHI for many years. I want to throw the microphone and the floor across to our first presenter today, Donald Proctor. Donald. Sorry, Donald, still on mute there, mate. So, Donald, your phone, it's saying your phone's still on mute, mate. Yeah, there you go.
Is that okay now?
Yeah, spot on. Thanks, Donald.
Right. Sorry, I had to press two different unmute buttons. I've now discovered. Okay, so I'm sorry. I'll just go back. I won't flick around. I am going to talk about something only for a very short time, but it's not one of the things on the list, so I apologise for that, but I would have had to be a mind reader to get that right. However, some of those things on the list I would love to participate in discussions about at a future time. So I thought I would talk about sustainability in asset management, and just from one particular viewpoint. Some time ago, or not that long ago, I was asked a question in our Mission Australia Housing Sustainability Committee about what goal would I set for that this sustainability committee could achieve. So I came out with the one that's on the screen here, and that's by 2030, all social housing tenants are enabled, informed and incentivised to use affordable, renewable, carbon neutral energy to keep their homes comfortable and engage effectively with their communities. So I thought I might bring this along to the group to see how you can help me achieve this. And sorry, I'll just put it on presentation as I was asked to do before. That's better. So being a sort of strategic planning sort of person, I thought I might start this off by looking at a fairly generic approach, strategic planning approach to the problem. And so I thought to myself of looking at it in 5 steps. One, to get all the social housing organisations on board with the vision, and to achieve the vision of all tenants being able to access renewable energy. That would mean finding a way to get all the state and territory housing authorities, the New Zealand housing authorities, and all the community housing providers on board with this as well. The next step, I thought, for Mission Australia Housing would be to develop and implement an action plan, and that would apply, I think, for every organisation. Measure our progress along the way, identify barriers and solve them, and in the end, come 2030, to celebrate the success. So then I thought, well, okay, how could you go about getting all social housing organisations on board with the vision? And first step to that, I thought, would be identifying who they are. So all CHPs, that's not difficult. We have lists of all the CHPs in Australia, and they're on the registrar's website, and I'm sure the same thing applies to New Zealand. All the government housing authorities, even easier. And perhaps as well, to get on board with this vision, the key sector organisations who could play a role, a really important role, I think, in bringing their members together and adopting this sort of vision themselves. So then I thought, well, how could this happen? And in the context of this AHI seminar, I thought really each of us has to start where we are now, because there's no time to waste given the climate crisis. And wherever you are, do what you can from whatever position or where you're in, or whatever organisation you're in. What I've found from my experiences both in the government with New South Wales Housing, with my previous employer Compass Housing, and now with Mission Australia Housing, there's a real need to get the broader sustainability agenda on the organisation's strategic plans, if it isn't there already. Many years ago, I actually wrote the first ecological sustainable development policy for what was then Housing New South Wales. It ended up, to tell you the truth, being a bit of virtue signalling. They wanted a policy but didn't want to do anything about it. I think times have changed significantly from then, but maybe sometimes with some organisations, that's the pain you've got to go through. I have to say Mission Australia Housing is taking sustainability very seriously. Mission Australia, which is the national umbrella group under which Mission Australia Housing sits, has employed a person to write a strategy. They're talking about employing a few people to implement it now. And Mission Australia Housing has a separate committee that is aligned with the broader committee. So that's becoming quite active now, and I think that's a really good example of a place that we can launch this vision of enabling our tenants, all our tenants, to have access to sustainable energy, within the next 5 or 10 years. So it's about adopting a vision for the organisation, or a version of this vision, could be said in many different ways. And then I think so that it can be universal, some organisations really need to get this on the agenda, and then get support from sector bodies like CHIA, AHI, Power Housing, Community Housing Aotearoa. I think all these bodies are really well set up now to, support and assist with this vision. And what I'm going to ask you is, if you have any thoughts on this, whether you agree or don't agree that's a worthwhile vision to pursue, or whether you've got your own version of this vision, I'd really like you to start whacking away at the keyboard and put comments in the chat. That would be terrific. And then I just talk a little bit about how. I think about how do you actually develop and implement an action plan like this? And it starts from reviewing and sharing what we're already doing, looking what others are doing, develop a plan. That's what an action plan is. What can we do ourselves? What, as individuals, what can we do as an organisation that we're in? And start doing it. Start doing what you can, because perhaps you can't do much. Other people can do a lot, and some, I know, community housing providers are doing a lot. I just was on a call yesterday where someone mentioned they've got a program of putting 300 solar systems on housing at the moment. I know the New South Wales Land and Housing Corp are have some big programs around solar and air conditioning, combined programs with in hotter climates. And so there is a lot happening, but the way I see it, there's also a lot not happening as yet. And so some examples to get real about this as what I see happening and what could happen. So part of this policy about enabling tenants to have access to renewable energy would possibly be that there are solar panel installations on existing and all new homes. Of course, I think in Tasmania, all the power comes from renewable energy anyway. So maybe solar power there is only a thing around cost, and same maybe for New Zealand. I'm not exactly sure about that. But wherever people are getting their power from coal burning, it's got to stop. And tenants need to be enabled to have an option. Whereas homeowners have an option, or most do, but tenants in the main don't have much of an option, and that's got to change. Improving the energy efficiency of new and existing homes. So that's coming from the other way and saying, if we improve the energy efficiency, we decrease the need for power, and therefore we're starting to get to that place we want to get to. But they have to, as well as being able to reduce their bills, they have to be able to source renewable only energy. Enabling access to green energy on the grid. That's maybe a story of less cost for community housing providers, because maybe to some extent the industry has already set it up. For example, Energy Australia, some of you may know, has an option to opt into carbon neutral electricity, and soon I think gas as well. Now, how do they do that? Well, apparently they are, buying up all the wind and solar power they can, but they're also operating on the basis of offsets, carbon offsets. Whether you believe that they're effective or not, they are all accredited according to a system, and so they do claim that if you opt in, all your energy from Energy Australia is green. And apologies to other companies who may also have that as well. Embedded energy networks for people living in apartments, I think, is something that is emerging. Some people may have licked it around the problems with that, and I think that will be a bigger strategy in the future. But I'm not sure if that comes totally with a renewable outcome. The last practical example that I've seen coming through are various companies offering a no upfront solar system approach. And for example, a company called Lotus Energy has approached Mission Australia Housing with a proposal to put solar panels on 1,000 of our properties for free, and enter into arrangements with the tenants to give them a good discount on their electricity bill, so that they get the money back from consumption, so that the tenants don't get their solar power for free, but they get it much cheaper than they're getting it now. And the biggest, I think, selling point, one of the big selling points of this proposal is that the company itself looks after maintenance, insurance, replacement, all the tenant issues with their power, so that the community housing provider doesn't need to get involved. So we are looking at that one at the moment, you know, trying to assess the long-term implications of it. So that's my short presentation. I can't see any of the comments because I've got the presentation up, but hopefully there might be a few, and it's something that I'd be interested in engaging with people past this event, if they're interested and if they've got any ideas about how this could be achieved.
Yeah, Donald, we do have a comment and a question from Catherine Morey from WA. So can you see that now, Donald? Can you see Catherine's comment, or would you like me to read it out?
No, I've just unshared, and now I've just read the comment.
So in respect to using solar panels as an example.
So will I just read out Catherine's comment there?
Yeah, if you wish, or if you want to just respond. I think everyone can see that that there.
It's okay. So it's aspirational, where basic components of property need investment. How do you replace solar panels, for instance, where the savings goes to the tenant rather than the landlord? Okay, so this is the classic question of the split incentives between landlords and tenants. In Compass Housing, we did a pilot, which was very interesting, where we paid to put the panels on with a 50% subsidy from the New South Wales government, but nevertheless, Compass did pay half the cost up front. What then? We did it up with the deal with the tenants, though, that we would put solar panels on their houses if they signed up to one energy provider called Diamond Energy. The tenants then paid their bills to Diamond Energy, and Diamond reimbursed Compass for the feed-in power that the solar panels generated that the tenants didn't use. So that provided for a 5-year payback period to Compass for the panels. So that is an example of how that can work. The downsides of that is that it's a pilot project. It was sort of time consuming to set up and work out. There were lawyers involved, but all that work is now done and never has to be done again. And the other one is that there is some admin involved to, check that the reimbursements are coming in properly, although that was all happening very well when I left there. The other one is that the tenants could decide to, someone cold calls and says, well, I've got a deal with you, why don't you switch power companies? Well, they've got the right to do that, but it undoes the system. The Lotus Energy one looks even more interesting, because they've actually taken those lessons on board and made it really no admin for CHP, no maintenance, insured, and if the panels have to be taken off, they'll come and take them, or take the whole system away and make good at no cost. So I think the market is evolving with options where the investment of the company can be paid back, but there's no upfront cost to the CHP, and that way it's sort of turning it from aspirational into practical. and it can be done at large scale.
Yeah, Donald, there's also a follow-on point from Joanne, I think, in support of that, and with a point which I think you were just making around the need for follow-through and community education into the benefits of people connecting their infrastructure. Would you agree on that one?
So if I got that point right about sort of education and informing tenants,
yeah.
Look, I think that is really, really crucial. I think some of us, you know, people like us, we probably feel like we're totally over, you know all about the climate crisis, know all about, you know, the politics to do with renewable energy and energy targets. But my experience in talking to tenants in their homes is that they're not so informed, and they go, "What's this about?" And it really, I found it really came down more to the allure of a saving in their energy bill than it did to, you know, saving the world or stopping, you know, slowing down climate change, that sort of thing. So, you know, we've really got to be practical, listen to people, respond to what their needs are and what, you know, what their perceived needs are, and but also by having those discussions, I found that tenants became a lot more interested in that idea of participating in a non-renewable economy once they found they actually had a go at doing it. But if they had no options, they just ignored it. So what can I do? Put it out of my head. So I think it's the pilot project I saw happen with Compass really was an awakening for a lot of those tenants about, oh, actually I can participate in this. I'll open up to it. And then they, you know, started to think about a lot more other related things like, oh, you know, everything from composting to all sorts of other sort of environmental, you know, issues that they could get engaged with.
Yeah. Donald, there's a couple of others, and then we're going to get over to you, Steve. Tony in NZ talked about a $28 million fund that's been put together for solar panels and batteries on public and Maori housing. So that's an interesting. We might get a bit more info from Tony and share that post event as well. Theo talked from Bridge Housing, talked about going to tender recently and to start trialling embedded network. As he quite rightly adds, the issue will be incentivising tenants to sign up, absolutely. And then Greg Maloney goes on to talk about some of the work Northcote Rental Housing Cooperative is doing around the drafting of a climate action plan, etc. Can I just ask you, Donald, just one question? One thing that struck with me with your opening couple of lines was around the fact that your organisation is taking this seriously. What are the catalysts for organisations, say at a board level, to take sustainability as a key strategic tool? What was the catalyst, say, for your organisation to take that seriously? What changed, if anything?
What changed was that particular individuals on the Mission Australia board started to raise the issue. You know, they're sort of, those people are professional, you know, company directors, and there's a huge movement, you know, which is not particularly recent, but it's building, about social responsibility in corporations, but also the idea that recognising Mission Australia has, you know, a mission, like most of the organisations represented here, of supporting disadvantaged people. And there's more and more evidence coming out that it's the disadvantaged people in our societies, across, not just in Australia, but across the globe, that will be hardest hit by climate change. And it's happening already, and therefore there's a responsibility of organisations like ours to do something about it. Hence comes resources being put into a sustainability strategy. In Compass Housing, where I previously worked, they took the angle of, well, yeah, we're a citizen of the world. we want to do things for affordable housing around the world, which Compass is, along with, say, CHL, but also then adopting an international approach to sustainability by adopting the UN Sustainability Development Goals. And that's a whole nother story if you're not up to them, but you can Google that, the SDGs. It's a very, very useful framework for pursuing agendas of sustainability from a physical assets point of view, or from a community development inclusion point of view, or from a health point of view, urban development point of view. So there's a whole lot of ways you can approach this, and I think the common element that I have seen in, well, just a few organisations, but also ones I've read about, like Mirvac and Stockland and Lend-Lease, on their websites, they've got a lot of stuff about sustainability. Some of it's driven by market competitiveness. Some of it's driven by altruism, and it just aligns with the existing mission of with a small m of any organisation. One thing that we've done just recently is put in a schedule in our maintenance tenders about environmental sustainable management, and it went to the scoring of our recent Mid-North Coast maintenance tender, for example, and the schedule about what the contractor said they're going to do in relation to improving environmental management is now written into the maintenance contract, and it is a KPI. So because that sustainability goal is in Mission Australia's strategic plan and business plan, it's now feeding through into an operational document, which is a maintenance contract. Where it comes from in the beginning, I just think it's a seed that gets planted somewhere along the line by somebody, and it could come from many different angles, I think.
Excellent. Thanks, Donald. And there might be some news come out of the G7 that's meeting later on this week in Cornwall. And I'm pleased to let you guys know that Matthew Bales from the UK has just joined the call. We'll be hearing from Matthew shortly, but we might ask Matthew if he could drop down to Cornwall and maybe represent the interests of the social and affordable housing sector for us and get this on the ticket. So thank you, Donald. Thanks for that. And there's probably a couple of other things that we might come back to, Donald, when we get together as a panel.
And thanks for your comments, everyone. I'll read them later with interest.
Yeah, brilliant. Steve Lyons, we're going to come across to you. Thanks for your patience, Steve. You're going to focus on property condition assessment and property standards. So over to you, mate.
Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that screen there and hear me. Yep.
Yep, certainly can.
Good. Okay. So there's a number of aspects of what we've already talked about through the breakout sessions and what Donald's just talked about as well, that built into these slides as well. I think one thing that really stands out is about people. It's about all of us as practitioners, the industry as a whole, the individuals really just understanding the subject of asset management planning, asset management, and making it work for yourself, for your organisation. And with my topic here being more about the property assessments and what I call the foundation to planning, I think it fits in nicely with the discussions that have been had so far. So with that in mind, I'll just kind of remind everybody that community housing, social housing is a key part of our built infrastructure. I think it is recognised as that now, but I think it is it's us looking after our houses as well as we can, so we actually look after our community, and I think the two are nicely linked. And there's a few statements like look after what you've got before you start building new, but recognizing there's a tension there as well about we need to build more houses, especially community social housing, But if we look after the houses, then we do more to look after the community. And we've got to think beyond that return on investment for the social infrastructure, and think about the benefits to those different type of groups. I'm often asked, well, if I'm going to spend X dollars on implementing an asset management framework, an asset management system, it takes a lot of time and effort and dollars. What's the return? So am I going to save money in the next 5 years, 10 years? Am I going to lower my operational costs? The answer is usually no. It's about how to better allocate the benefits to those different stakeholders or groups, how to manage the risks, and the value beyond that, just financial value, which I think is important to understand. So over the years, I've learned a lot around this area. And again, it's about the people with that understanding, with the interest and the means to make it work that is really important. And starting with that support from the governing body, the senior management. Without that top-down support to managing your assets, your houses in a planned way, then it's potentially doomed to failure. And that was mentioned today a couple of times with how do we move from a reactive approach to managing our assets to a proactive planned approach. And that's, I think, what it's all about. ISO 55000, many of you might have heard of that. It's the international standard for asset management. And it's all about systems and processes and frameworks from the top down to get the resources needed to focus on the assets that matter in a risk-based approach. So the second point there was the detailed plan. So yes, having a good bunch of asset information, we can generate a life cycle plan going out to 10, 20, 100 years. But having also that detailed plan of the next 3 years, knowing what you need to do now and why is really a crucial part of the whole process. Providing some real value back and not waiting for what I call the big bang, not waiting to get all the information together before you can then present what it really means from a planning or a project list. And the third thing there is just the importance of having the right data at any level. And I'll go into this a bit further. Whether the right data is, I need 500 pieces of components in a house, through to I just need the top 10, or what's the high level property information compared to the low level defects and component information. So that the answers to that is very much based on your business needs and what's driving those plans, how you develop, you plan your works program. But you've just got to have a good data set and have a good asset information strategy to improve on that data set over time. It's never going to be 100% right. And I think if you strive for it to be 100% right, then you're probably spending too much money on it and too much time. The fourth point there is the importance of that feedback loop. So you analyze, you plan, got your projects, implement those, and feed the resulting data back into your asset register. You've just replaced a roof, you've taken a year to plan it out, or maybe a series of roofs, just cost $50,000, and you need to push that data back into your asset register and update it, refresh it, and keep it relevant. And I think someone mentioned today to have one system that does everything, from housing management to maintenance management to asset management to project planning, project management, all those things is the ideal approach. I've yet to see that one system, but if anybody knows that, then it'd be great to share that with everybody. And the fifth point there is resourcing for the ongoing business process. It takes time. It takes headspace, a good mindset, and it takes money and budget. And to have that embedded within your annual budget, operational budget, to have the people available, or having the ability to outsource what you need to do. And more importantly, I think having KPIs established with key people may have shared roles to say that your task is to keep this data up to date. your task is to ensure that your levels of service statements, standards and policies will drive the planned works program. Your task is to present this information in a compelling way to the senior management and to the board, and to make a difference. So having the right people comes back to the people part all the time, I suggest. So do you need to better manage the life cycle of your portfolios? And if you think about what your reason why is, why do you need to do this? And in some states, you need to do it because the government tells you to do it. In good boards, they are telling you to do asset management planning because they see the value, long-term value, excuse me, and risk you're managing. But also think about you're providing environments for people to thrive. And to do that, it's also beyond conditions, beyond just having a well-maintained property. It's about having a healthy home, energy efficient, is what Donald was just talking about. Having it secure, having it safe, health and safety. So all these things come together to provide for that healthy environment for people to thrive. And there's a number of ways to capture that information, to analyze it, to then plan for that. Just like Management 101, you can only manage what you can actually measure. And that's why it's important to capture level information. So as an asset manager for their housing portfolio with limited funding and limited people, and that message has come through a couple of times through the breakout sessions, especially for smaller organizations. We usually say that any organization below 300 properties may struggle to get the funding, the resources to do things properly. So how can you plan for these environments for people to thrive when you've got limited resources to use? Now, there's two approaches. What I call the bottom up and the top down. So the bottom up is probably what we're all used to. It's saying that we've got a series of sites, and on sites, and they may be just street addresses, we've got a building that's got floors or a particular street address. And then within that accommodation unit or the property, you're breaking it down to the locations or the rooms within that property. So this is what I call the bottom-up approach to evidence-based planning. So you're identifying, describing your portfolio to a level of detail that you would do the works at. And the question is, to what level of detail do you go down to? Do you identify maybe the fittings? A typical rule of thumb I use is turn the building upside down, whatever falls out, don't assess. That's usually a good one. But usually it might include the carpets, the air conditioners. If it's in a multi-unit complex, it's the lift and switchboards, the building engineering services. For a typical property or cottage, it'll be the flooring, kind of say point down, flooring, point up, ceilings, point sideways, walls, painting, windows, doors, things like that. But what level of detail to go to is the question. And a number of organizations we work with, they would be well over 100 components per house. Others have decided that 10 to 15 components per house does the job, depending on what the business needs are. But with that information, we then apply deterioration factors to it, because what we're after is a life cycle analysis. What could happen in the next 10 years, 20 years, or beyond? And then with that life cycle analysis, applying the policies and standards. And the policies and standards are aligned directly to that level of detail you're measuring in the field. So your policy is saying no bedrooms shall have any defects on carpets. Now that's a policy statement that could trigger $1 million worth of backlog overnight. So what we need to do is identify the defects on carpets in each of the rooms, and that determines that information strategy, what level of detail to measure at. And that's obviously a lower level of detail. But that type of policies and standards then can produce evidence to support, and as this is suggesting here, an increase in budgets over time. Or it might just support the best allocation of limited budgets, could be declining budgets over time as well. But it's about that risk-based approach. So I suggest that, say, 10% of organisations do this well across Australia and New Zealand. And there's what, 500 or so organisations, maybe 300 to 500 that could be in that category, meaning that there's about 90% that could do better, but really struggle to gain resources. So with that in mind, what does a top-down approach look like where you've got the limited capability, resources, and budgets? You've still got your properties, you've still got your sites, and the difference here is that you don't have the funds or the resources to go out and do the condition assessments, the property assessments, to bring this data together. So you could just say, as a asset manager with a project planning hat on, do some structured interviews to know what is likely to be needed over time, over the next, say, 3 years, and start building up that knowledge of the properties at a accommodation level, and start thinking about things like, so I'll just move something out of the way here, the project drivers, what's the reasons that is driving these projects, the criticality and the risks associated with them, and how they're contributing to your organization's goals. And with that in mind, you can then start building up your asset register from those projects, from works being done. And you could ask service providers to contribute to that asset data and build that as well, the FM providers, or it could be the trades that could provide you some information on the stoves, on the roofing, on the painting. It's amazing how much good inherent data you've already got, but it's how you can harness that and bring it together. And just establishing good ongoing business processes to capture that knowledge and translate it into some level of asset register. So you can still then produce an asset management plan and still applying these policies and standards. And then over time, you're building up that information, the knowledge base, and you can then start doing more detailed life cycles and provide evidence and business case justification to invest more in a lower level of detail and start targeting assessments in the field, and targeting for those properties that you know have got more of a poorer condition, or you may need to develop business cases for. So I'll just quickly kind of go through a framework, a model here, where there's you're wanting to know your assets. You're needing to know what you need now and into the future. You need to know what you're going to do now based on risk, and in the future based on sustainability, and then actually do the work. And this feedback loop here means that as the projects are done, you feed that information back to the top of the hopper here, the information. So you've got your asset register, big value of components that feeds down into the life cycle analysis. Over, say, 20 years, you may have multiple cycles of replacement. And then you're applying those policies and standards to produce a list of possible projects that feed into your works program. And then you make those decisions and you implement and you feed that data back. So I thought I'd just kind of bring this up as my last slide to give you an idea of what I would suggest could be one of the ideal asset management housing management systems, all the different components of that. And as someone was saying before, if there was just one system that did everything. So what I'd kind of turn that around and say, if there was an ecosystem of connected applications that did all of this, I think that would be the answer, rather than expecting one application or one software application to provide everything. As long as we're all connected on the same type of ecosystem and connect. So property information. It's straightforward, street address and a number of other characteristics that might help determine whether it's fit for the demographics in that area. Components identified, described and assessed at a level that enables, say, 20-year forecasting, aligned with budgets and lifecycle works programs. So that's a component level lifecycle analysis. Defects, as you're assessing the components, you're looking for the defects as well. And the defects then produce that repairs program. So the component assessment provides the life cycle forecast, the defects are producing the repairs program. And then the quality shortfalls. And this is where the energy efficiency can fit into it. It can be the healthy home. It could be the secure, safe, functional, amenity, all those items beyond condition. And what we normally do there is establish a number of simple questions with your inspector or through desktop means. The answer of those questions can trigger a shortfall that can then generate a works program. And then the ability to analyze and interrogate that information, to move to a planning, to enable the life cycle analysis, the scoping of works, ideally in the field, you're being able to also scope the works. I'm just going through this quickly, and the management of workflows and the overall reporting, maybe an embedded BI tool. So that's kind of what we see as being, the ideal application that kind of brings all that together, and designing an asset information strategy that enables that is really the key to making that work. And yes, that's it, Mark.
Thank you, Steve.
Questions come through?
Yeah, Steve, just a question for you, and it was one of our opening takeaways with one of our groups was a statement around how do you stick to the asset management plan, and I heard you talk about your framework and also the utilising the availability of the data that you've got access to. Would that sum up simply that requirement of how we get organisations to stick to that asset management plan? Is that a fair read?
Well, I think it's all about the people, the job descriptions, their KPIs, what they're measured on. I think unless you actually have that embedded within the organisation, it becomes an ad hoc task, and it may become more of a every 3 year, let's do a property condition assessment. It just has to be embedded from the top down. Yeah.
Excellent. And Catherine, just over in WA, said they've got a situation of increasing costs of materials and labour in WA. Is there a way to approach your next 3-year planned work budget in that environment?
From an asset management plans perspective, it's always done on current day currencies without factoring in escalations or CPI. And that's why every year you update the asset management plan in theory. So as you've got escalations happening or cost increases happening in maybe a shorter period of time, yes, that's where you move from the asset level analysis into the project level planning, where you are tendering that type of works. From, again, the asset management plan perspective, always be careful to use the unit rates or costs that you are seeing over a 3-year type of average, as opposed to a shorter term peak.
Right. Okay. All right, Steve. Thank you. And Catherine's just got a follow up. What is the justification of doing a BCA every 3 years?
A BCA, the Building Code of Australia assessment. Avoid it.
I think a building condition assessment is my guess.
Right. Okay. Probably not avoid that one.
We'll rub that out of the recording, Steve.
Probably not avoid that one.
Yeah.
Well, I'll put it a different way, that it's about how you manage and update, maintain your asset data. And if you decide to do it every 3 years, then that's fine. The way I kind of use a business case around this is it takes 100% of the time the first time, and 30% of the time the second round. So the first assessment you do is going to cost the most. You're identifying the components that go into each of the rooms and you're measuring them. And that's the most time consuming part. How many square meters of paint, flooring, if you take that type of detailed approach. But when you do that, you've now got a really good asset register. So when you come around and do it again, you go into every room, you've got a nice spread, well, click of your different components in that room and just tick your condition grade changes. And that's 30% of the time the second time around.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you, Steve. And also Theo mentioned the CHIA schedule of rates as well as a potential resource for people to refer to. Now, we'll leave that there. I did promise you a comforts stop, and we're going to do that now. So we've still got a little bit to get through. So if we could just, if we could give it 5 minutes. So 5 minutes, we'll come back to hear from Gary Sperling and some of the work that they are doing in South Australia with Anglicare. So 5 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, we'll come back. right. We'll give people just another 60 seconds. We're just at a idea of putting up a quick poll from one of our participants, Jonathan, I think. Kelly, do you want to just run that poll while people are just coming back in the room, please? Lost that functionality on my end for some reason. You could just run that. All right. Gary, can you hear me okay? Yep, you can. Excellent. All right, just another 30 seconds, Gary, and we'll jump on with you. Just trying to get a poll to work, but we're having a few issues.
Hey, Mark, the poll's working and people are filling it out.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I just can't see it. That's fine. Sorry, Kel.
All good.
What's that saying? Let the baker
We've
bake
got
the bread.
20 of 35.
Great, fantastic. I think Jonathan, that was your idea suggestion. Great one, mate. Thank you for that. So we'll get a look at that. How you going, Kel? Do you want to announce the results?
We're up to 75%. People are still voting.
So whilst we wait for that, we're going to hear from Gary Sperling and then Matthew Bales over in the UK. Matthew, thank you again for your early start to your day. There were some comments earlier. We were a bit disappointed that you wouldn't get on at 4:32, mate, by the way. So you might have to explain yourself there. But no, we really appreciate you being available this morning, your time. Kel, how do we go poll-wise?
Yeah, we're sitting at 80%. So I reckon let's go for it. So I'll end the polling here.
Yep.
So majority of people on the call at the moment, so 28% have worked in the sector for in between 5 to 6 years. We've got 7% who are brand new, so welcome, in the last 12 months, 3% in 1 to 2 years, 3% 2 to 4 years. So the next second highest one at 17% is 7 to 9 years. Then 15 to 20 years worth of professional service is 17% to Mark. So quite a lot of years there. And then that 26 to 30 years, we've actually got 10%, pardon me, 10% of the people who voted who are actually have served in between 26 to 30 years in the housing industry.
Oh, fantastic. That's wonderful. Yeah, great. And willing to share their expertise, which is awesome. That's fantastic. Okay, so I'm conscious of time. Welcome back from the comfort break. We're going to go across to you, Gary Sperling, in lovely South Australia, mate.
No worries. I'll just share my screen. Everyone's got that?
Yeah, we can see Gary.
Beautiful. Good afternoon, everybody. Gary Sperling is my name as I work out this technology. This is one thing doing this presentation, another thing doing it on Zoom. It's quite a challenge. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and hopefully, as I take you through our journey, it gives you a little bit of insight into what we've achieved, and there could be some learnings in there for you as well. Let me just go back. All right. What I want to do today is just give you a bit of an overview of what I'm going to go through, which is going to cover a background, the genesis of our story, if you like, a bit of a high-level tour of some of the processes we went through in relation to how we got to where we are today and how our maintenance team is what it is, and I guess the journeys, and that's probably focusing mainly around staff and contractors. That's probably my main focus today, the outcomes of that process, and then obviously some of the learnings, and then we'll get into some question time. All right, so Anglicare SA, just for a bit of history, is a large community service organisation with a history of service provision to Adelaide families going back to 1860. It's an organisation that's been around a long time. Housing is just one of Anglicare's 3 core services, together with aged care and community services being the other 2 legs in that 3-legged stool. In August 2014, I joined the organisation. I was brought in specifically to establish, design and implement a housing maintenance team Prior to my arrival, maintenance had been delivered by tenancy, effectively. They were property managers and they did everything: cyclical, vacancy, responsive, planned. They did it all. Anglicare had just gained its Tier 1 accreditation, and it was positioning itself for growth, and it really wanted to grow, and it wanted to get in there and actually become a lot bigger. When I joined, we had 495 properties that was in our stock. We had 42 separate contractors, none of which actually had contracts. They were just loosely associated trades that we called upon as we needed them, and hoped that answer and hope that they would respond to the call. As I mentioned before, tenancy officers actually managed all of the properties and as well as the maintenance. And Anglicare had an inkling that it was in for some new stock, that the state government in South Australia had started a process of stock transfer, and with a program called Better Places and Stronger Communities, or BPSC as we affectionately know it. And it was all about transferring at that time about 1,100 of their properties to community housing providers. There were 2 parcels of land, and Anglicare was going for one in the north, which made up of 479 properties. And it knew that if it won it, it needed to be ready for it, and it needed to actually make sure that it could hit the ground running day one should we win it. With a team of 1, me, I had 495 properties. There was potentially 479 assets coming my way, and 42 contractors. I had a lot of work to do. I needed to build a team, I needed to design it, I needed to get contractors sorted out, and I needed to work out exactly how I was going to get maintenance away from tenancy, because it sounds easy in principle, but it was a bit more difficult in practice. By the end of 2014, so 5 months in, I'd actually recruited a coordinator, had a 0.5 of an admin person to help me do invoicing. 2 internal staff had transferred over into the team to become housing maintenance officers, and they were effectively on the road every day. They initially were the ones taking calls from our tenants, contractors, tenancy officers, myself, which proved to be quite challenging for those. So we had a small team to start with. To commence 2015, we also, in preparation for the growth, actually upgraded our system. We were on Champ, and we went over to a tenancy asset management system, Copura. It probably does sell itself as being an all-in-one system, but yeah, we'll leave that alone. The first major stock transfer, Better Places, as we talked about, was confirmed. We had actually learnt that we were successful in gaining the 479 properties. They also told us that we could actually go out and do inspections prior to transfer. So that meant we needed building inspectors online to do all the assessments, and that threw its first curveball at us, because we didn't have any contractors necessarily to do that. There was enough out there that could, but we just weren't sure which way to go. We also were clearly going to need more staff. I had to prepare my first budget, maintenance budget, and I must admit I had no real clue and limited reference. I think my first budget took me 3 to 4 weeks to develop, and it was literally looking at every property line by line. I can probably pull together my budgets today in 2 days, and it's a lot simpler, it's a lot more streamlined, and it's all about having that right data. It was a very steep learning curve nonetheless. As a team, we still weren't ready. We didn't have our contractors locked in. We really wanted them to be ready come transfer. We wanted to make sure that they were actually on board. They knew what their expectations were, and we're all on the same page and singing from the same hymn book, so to speak. We also needed some more staff. Our team wasn't big enough for the growth that was coming, and we needed to actually fix that up as well. So after reviewing the structure and the staff and contractors alike, by July 2015, we'd actually grown. I brought on a building inspector, so that by October of 2015, we actually had myself as a manager, coordinator. We had 1.5 admin maintenance officers, and they effectively become the beginning of our service desk, if you like. It's a dedicated resource where tenants, contractors, and that would ring, so that they weren't ringing people on the road, having to pull over and take phone calls and deal with tenant queries. They'd actually have a service desk or a help desk, if you like, that they can ring 7 days a week, We had after hours people on call. And so that was a service we implemented. As I said, we did bring in a building inspector. This was probably one of our first decisions about, do we contract or do we do it in-house? And we actually opted for the in-house option of recruiting a building inspector. And the main reason for that was to actually keep the knowledge retained inside. We could have used an external contractor to do it. There was plenty out there. However, what we were concerned was that they'd come in, do the inspection, give us the data and walk out the door, and all that knowledge and experience would be gone. And we wanted to retain that. We thought it was very valuable. As it turns out, that building inspector that we employed back in 2000 is still with us. And so it actually has worked out very well, because we certainly have got that knowledge and it is retained in-house. We also got 2 field maintenance officers. So we actually started building a team. That's one thing that comes with growth, is obviously more rent, which gives you more money, which enables you to actually do more. And I think that's been covered clearly today. The next part was actually our contractors and actually working on them, because we really needed to get them on board and actually part of the team and part of the vision. We very clearly from the beginning saw contractors as an extension of our team. They weren't them and us. It wasn't the evil necessity. It wasn't those that just drained our budget. They were actually a valuable part of our team that helped us deliver quality maintenance and quality housing to our tenants. We weighed up things like, do we go a head contractor model versus a contractor panel, and weighed up whether, which direction would we go. We'd heard some horror stories around head contractor models, and we'd seen that in other areas, and we sort of weren't sure about that, because one of the things that we're really after was a long-term relationship with each of our contractors, and not just one mother contractor, and then they've got all these other people in the mystery that we don't ever have access to. Really important point was we wanted our contractors to make money, and we made it really clear to them that you have to make money out of this. If you don't make money, then you're no good to me, because you're not going to be here tomorrow. It's not sustainable. I need you. I'm depending upon you. And it's really important that they feel, and that for them to feel free to be actually able to make money. It kept it competitive. And if they took it too far, well, they'd learn the downside of that as well. We started to review our contractor list, and if only we could pick them off a shelf like that, pre-packaged, it'd be nice and easy, but they don't come that way. So we started reviewing our list and looking at which way we're going to formalise things, head contracts, panel arrangement, and we actually landed on a panel arrangement. We decided that we weren't convinced that a head contractor was the way to go. We wanted to remain in control, and we wanted the relationship with the contractor. So we wanted to do the panel arrangement, and we were going to do a select tender, not an open tender, because we didn't actually know what the market would do. We wanted to have an element of control. It was the first tender of its sort that we were entering into, and so we just wanted a little bit more control with less surprises. So what we opted for, as I said, was a select tender. We had 42 contractors, as I mentioned before, to start with. Of those 42 contractors, 24 of them were invited to participate in the select tender. 11 of the 42 we excluded from the select tender. However, we kept them on our system because we recognised that they didn't need a contract. There are some contractors that you don't actually have a binding contract with. You can actually just have them on the books. They're available because there's no real KPIs associated with what they do. There's no real performance measures. There's nothing you really need to keep close ties to. You just need them there when you need them. And therefore probably the bigger the planned jobs or the one-off jobs that don't happen that often. Of the 42, 7 contractors we just discounted altogether. We removed. We weren't really dealing with them. They were just on the system, a bit of legacy, and we just tidied up and took that opportunity just to exit them from the system. We did, however, invite 9 new contractors to participate in the tender over the various panels, and that was one to get some fresh ideas and fresh perspectives, and also so that we could actually feel we were really testing the market, and we didn't have this closed shop of just sort of being told what we always thought we knew. It did bring some independent players into it that actually helped us give us that sense that we're actually getting a fair sense of the market and its competitive process. The panels that we come up with, initially we had 8 trade panels, and they were based on the expected workloads and the types of trades that we're going to be dealing with. based on those workloads, we then determined how many contractors would we want on each panel, because we didn't want to just put 5 of each on every panel, because the work just wasn't there, and we wanted to make sure there was enough work to keep people interested and not waste their time. So these panels also primarily and very importantly was actually focused mainly on responsive, planned and vacancy. We didn't really want to get into cyclical. At this point, cyclical was going to be dealt with at a separate time because that was a bit more quantitative, whereas responsive and planned and vacancy was a little bit vague. It was more about being on a panel, not necessarily a body of work that they were going to be contracted to do. So the panels that we set up originally was plumbing. We wanted 3 plumbers, and that's probably not uncommon across most community housing providers, that plumbing is pretty much up there with the main type of work that goes on in any property. That was very closely followed by electricians. We needed 2 of those that we wanted on there. We thought that would be safe. Painting was the next one, next type of trade that we knew that we would need, followed by flooring. Flooring was obviously a big area that we needed, and a lot of these make a common sense, and it's a no-brainer of which trades, but nonetheless. And then we wanted a bunch of general maintenance. We needed people that could, handyman type, that could get around and just do the odd bod that we didn't want to send a plumber or electrician or painter to do. But I guess included in that, we had glazers. We had a panel for glazers. We had a panel for air conditioning. We had a number of properties that did have air conditioning that needed to be, not so much the servicing, but we knew that they'd need replacing under the planned maintenance scheme. The other thing that we did is we added 2 multi-trades for our vacancies. So I guess it's the closest we've come to head contracts, where we actually have a builder type that's got more trades under them to help us with the bigger jobs. And that was mainly around vacancies and to go down that process. As I mentioned before, we excluded cyclical, and that's mainly because of that was more specific. We could actually quantify the work for trades such as pest control, gutter cleaning, AC servicing, smoke alarms, grounds maintenance. We could actually really quantify what work you want done, how often, where, and you could actually really get fixed pricing. Whereas the first tender in relation to the plumbing electrical was more about, what are your rates? What do you charge per hour? What's your call out fee? What's your standard cost for fixing a dripping tap? So we tried to come up with, make it as simple and as easy to evaluate as possible, because otherwise you can overcomplicate this and overthink it, and then it becomes a real nightmare when it comes to evaluation stage. Because Anglican Care is such a big organisation, we're fortunate, and the bonus of being in an organisation this size is that we had a procurement team, and so outside of housing, it sits within corporate services. So we're able to call upon procurement to manage the process, and that helped us extensively. We obviously, as maintenance, had to develop the scope for each trade type. It was specific for each one of those panels. One of the things that was really clear, we didn't want a set of shared rates that each contractor was going to have to work towards. We wanted each contractor to provide their own pricing. We wanted them to be competitive and know that if that's the pricing they submitted and they won, that's the pricing we were going to hold that company to. Without getting into the lessons learned, we'll talk about that a bit later on. But that was just the mindset we had, and that's the way that we went along with it. We wanted a long-term partnership with each contractor, and so we made it really clear that they needed to quote this, that they would actually make money, that they wouldn't cut themselves short. This is not about winning the work; it's actually about delivering and being sustainable, so that they were there when we needed them to be there. The contracts we offered originally were a 12 plus 12, as in a 12-month plus a 12-month option. We would review it at the 12-month mark and just see where things are going and see if we can fix it up. Like I said, they were not bidding on work packages, but being part of a select panel. No guarantees on work levels, but we did provide a breakdown of potential spend by trade type to keep them interested, basically, and that worked pretty well. The tender went out in early July of 2015. What we did do, though, in the middle of July, so after they had all the paperwork for 2 weeks, we actually had a briefing session where we invited all of the contractors that were interested to come into a session in our head office, and we sat down with all of them in one room, and we had this interactive session between the maintenance team, procurement, and the contractors to just go through the tender, to go through what was in there, detail the breakdown on the common T's and C's. This actually reduced a large number of tender queries post this briefing session, which the procurement team were very grateful for, because it actually stopped a whole lot of time wasting, because they could actually ask it there and then. We covered a lot of common areas. So a lot of people have the same question. And so you answer it for one, and a lot of people madly taking notes because it actually fixed it. In this briefing, we talked about the background. We had, like I said, we invited 9 new contractors. They've never worked with us. They don't know us. They don't know potentially community housing. So it gave us an opportunity to explain who we are, what we're about, what our tenant cohort's like, give them an explanation of, the number of properties, the type of work, the key objectives, that how this was about, streamlining our supply base, that we had KPIs that we needed to achieve, and we needed to achieve them by and through them. And so how we were hitched to this, that if they failed, we failed. And we really needed them to buy into what we're doing to ensure that our homes are safe and that we're meeting all of our requirements. Tenants, we provided them an overview of all of our tenants and explained to them, the cohort, because sometimes if you've not been in this space, that can be an interesting experience if you've not dealt with social housing tenants. So we tried to give them some sort of insight into how that worked. We went through the scope of works in terms of responsive plan and how that fitted into the contracts and what that meant. Talked about the KPIs, what they're going to be measured on, what we were going to be measured on. We explained how they'd be engaged. So we went through a lot of basic stuff, so that just really, because you've got to remember that this information is what they're using to form their position and form their basis of their quotes. We weren't giving them a pricing schedule to say, this is what you have to work to. We wanted them to tell us what were they going to actually do it for and how much. We then obviously gave them a breakdown of timeline and scope. The tender closed late July that year, and then that sent us into a valuation stage. The valuation was based mainly on the value and the quality of the responses that we got from the contractors, the risk, and that was much about the risk of the contractor. Were they going to be there? Are they financially viable? We did some checks and balances to make sure that these companies are legit, they're insured, they've got all the right licenses, and they are saying who they are, that they are who they're saying they are. Cost benefit analysis was done. A lot of cultural fit. Not every company, not every contractor really fits with an organisation. So it's actually making sure that we'd be happy to be seen together, so to speak. A bit of that ethics. Compliance was a major component too, from work health and safety, JSAs, inductions, and so forth. So there was a lot of work done around that space as well. I guess the outcome of the tender process was in September 2015, we actually executed 18 contracts over 8 panels. We brought on 4 new contractors as a result, and we exited 10 previous contractors. That was the beauty of the competitive process, because their tender spoke for themselves, and they understood that going in, and it made it actually quite easy, because some of these contractors had been with the organisation for a long time, because they'd just been there. And so they realised that we were upping the ante and we were wanting to get to a new place, and we needed to be on board. And some of these guys just went up to speed with where the demands were at the time. We did follow up with the cyclical tender, and that resulted in us getting 4 more additional contractors at a later stage. We did that some months later. After the first 12 months, so we're 12 months into the contracts now, we come to the first renewal point, and this was significant for us because this was the first time we've done it, and we've come to that point. What we did experience is that our 2 multi-trades that we brought on for vacancies actually self-selected and decided not to participate in the next 12 months. That was a bit of a learning, which I'll go through, but the remaining 15 extended their contract for another 12 months, which was really good, and no prices changed in that time as well, because what we did give them an option at the 12-month mark was to actually renew pricing. Needless to say, without boring you with details, we've done this now a second time. In 2017, we did it again. We actually added 5 more panels to the list. In 2018, we extended those guys' contracts another 12 months with nobody dropping off. In 2019, we were going to do another tender, so we're doing them every 2 years. But because of resourcing strains, we couldn't actually do a tender, so we did a variation contract and extended all of the trade contractors by 12 months. We did have a couple drop off with the aim of doing another tender in 2020. Needless to say, 2020 hit and we didn't go out to tender. We just did another variation and extended our contractors to a 4th year. We will be doing a tender this year, but again, if I move to lessons learned, one of the things is we won't do a 12 plus 12. We're going to go a 2 plus 2, as in 2 years plus a 2-year option. It also strengthens our argument about, we want a long-term relationship. That actually really puts it in paper, puts it in writing that we want to do that. I guess in terms of some lessons that we learned through the process, mainly around, I guess, recruiting and contracting is, recruit well. It's hard, easy to get people in, it's harder to get them out. Contractors is a little bit simpler, but important points, I guess, is contractors are an extension of the team. They're not just an evil necessity. They're not an add-on. They're not, they really are a part of it. And our contractors really do feel that. And it's an important part of the relationship. We can't do anything without them. We need them. And I guess the other thing there is that our tenants are not the problem. It's really easy to think in maintenance that tenants are the problem. And sometimes they can create problems. And trust me, they do. And I'm preaching to the converted. But if it wasn't for tenants, we wouldn't have a job. And my team and my contractors understand that the tenants are not the enemy. The tenants are just people that are need our help, and we're there to do what we can to actually help them. Allowing contractors. Yep.
Sorry, just 2 more minutes, mate. Then we'll.
Yeah, thank you. No worries. I'm just about there. Allowing contractors to set their own schedule rates has kept them competitive, and it's actually kept them honest. And we've not found at all that we've ever been, taking the mickey out of and taken advantage of, because they know if they outprice themselves, then they're not going to get the work. One other important thing that we did is paying our contractors 30 days upon receipt of invoice. We actually pay them. And that actually means that whenever we ring, they're answering. They love, anyone in the business will tell cash flow is the most important thing. And we found that to be incredibly helpful in us making sure our contractors are there. Even if we actually are having a bit of a rough time, they still respond, and because they know that we're good for it at the end of the day. The briefing session was a real winner. There's some other things there, but for the sake of time, I won't bore you. Just to summarise, I guess today, we have 2,100 properties. We've got 10 staff, 74 contractors, and 19 panels. And we're still moving ahead. We certainly haven't arrived, but we're heading that way. So thank you very much.
Yeah, good on you, Gary, and thank you for sharing all that. You've certainly been on a journey yourself, and as an organisation. There are a number of questions that have come through. I'm just going to park those just ever so briefly, because I'm just conscious that we've got Matthew here. Give him a little bit of time for his presentation, and then we'll go into the Q&A. We might try and address those Q&A questions then, Gary, if that's okay with you. Then if there's some there that we can't get to, we'll come back to those people who've asked them post this session. So thank you for that. Now, Matthew, I did I think a reasonable job of introducing you prior to you coming on the call, mate. So again, we're very thankful for your time today to jump on board. You've got a big job over there at Paradigm Housing with over 15,000 homes under management. So thank you for sharing today. Thank you for getting up early to share your industry experience with our audience today. So over to you. Thanks, Matthew.
Yeah, no worries. And good morning from the UK. Can you see my screen? Have I
Certainly can, mate.
Yes, it's on. Brilliant. Right, I'm going to talk a bit about the kind of strategic end of asset management, and you'll probably figure this out quite quickly. I'm not a practitioner, so this is a kind of chief exec's view, I guess. Got a bit of a background in regulation and finance as well, so I guess you'll see a bit of that. And I'll try and do it in 20 minutes, Mark, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic, Matthew. Yeah, great.
All right, mate. Right. So just what I'm going to talk about. Firstly, the context in England. I'm reasonably familiar with Australia. I've been out there to talk to housing providers. The context here is different, so a little bit about that. I'll talk about paradigm. Actually, I'm talking about strategic asset management, but we run a repairs in-house business. It involves 110 guys in vans doing most of our maintenance and investment work. So I might touch on that very briefly, though it's not in the presentation. And then the key components of our asset management strategy, I'll go through each in turn and draw a few conclusions at the end. So this is quite important because the context here is different. So the first thing to say is that a very clear national standards for stock condition. Decent homes is the main one that we talk about in the social sector. It's not the only set of conditions, and that gives us some pretty clear obligations in terms of thermal efficiency to an extent, but component life cycles are kind of dictated by the decent home standard. So, we have to replace a kitchen every 20 years so that it doesn't meet the decent homes criteria. I think that is a little bit different to the Australian model, and as I understand it, some of the states in particular have got homes that probably wouldn't meet our decent home standard. It was brought in actually 2 or 3 decades ago now to address a chronic backlog in maintenance in publicly owned social housing. So there's an interesting history there as well. And then I would always start with what are we required to do in law over and above that. I'll talk about gas servicing in a moment, which is a really big thing over here. But there are various things in regulation in statute that we have to do. We always think about those things first. And then financial scrutiny is kind of different. So the regulator here demands a 30-year business plan. If you haven't got a sensible projection of reactive repairs costs and component replacement costs in that plan, then they're likely to spot it and you're likely to be in trouble. And that's born out of experience that some businesses didn't plan ahead, didn't have enough money in the plan to deal with investment works and got themselves into trouble in the past. So there's quite a lot of emphasis on that, and that emphasis is growing actually for reasons I'll come on to. You get slapped with a bad regulatory judgment if you don't do it properly. And then most of us have got a range of secured creditors. In our case, we've just had a credit rating and we've issued a £250 million public bond. I can tell you that the lenders and the credit rating agencies were very, very interested in our asset management plans, particularly around fire, which again I'll talk about because the context here is quite challenging, and zero carbon. And we always look at our assets from the perspective of, can you charge them? So again, slightly different to Australia, the assets we've got and manage, by and large, we own. So we're not in a leasehold position by and large. And if we are in a leasehold position, it'll be a long lease, 99-year plus lease. So we're charging those assets as you would in a mortgage, and we look at assets through that lens. And then zero carbon, I think you've got a kind of couple of climate change deniers in government in Australia. In theory, we haven't, and we're likely to have quite stringent thermal efficiency targets by 2030 and been confirmed. And we have a legal commitment over here to achieve zero carbon by 2050. No one knows how we're going to get there yet, and again, I'll talk about that in a moment. So a little bit about Paradigm, just over 30 years old. You can see we've got just over 16,000 homes now, development program about 500 a year, a fairly meaty balance sheet, and quite strong margins. So we're financially quite strong, and we do have, as I say, quite a big in-house maintenance team. So about 80–90% of maintenance is done in-house. So we're kind of running that service ourselves, and I can talk about that if people are interested in that as well. It's definitely something. My sort of top tip would be, if you're going to do it in-house, you have to have the same commercial disciplines that you would have if you're running it privately. If you allow the thing to kind of dictate its own terms, then you've got a big problem. But I can certainly talk about that if people are interested. And then our geography, it's 30 odd local authorities. The bottom of the screen is north of London, so it's the kind of suburbs of London. Our focus is in what we call the home counties, which is the areas that aren't London but are kind of commuter land. Perhaps the important point is these are very, very high value areas. Ratio of income to house prices in our core area actually is 16:1. So the latent land value we're sitting on and the open market value of our assets is very, very high. That does have ramifications. If we sell one property, we can probably build 3 or 4 if we get the conditions right. So there's a question about what you do with that land value. which kind of front, left and centre of our thinking. Right, so I said I would start with safety, and that's what we do. So, you know, what do we have to do to make sure our residents and our staff are safe? And in England, we tend to talk about the big six. So gas servicing, there is a binary obligation that thou shalt service a gas boiler every 12 months. If you fail, you've got a big problem. And fail on a few, you've got a big problem. And I'm going to talk about data. We've got 16,000 properties, probably 12,000 we've got an obligation to service the boiler. It's no good doing 11,500 well, because you're not quite sure what's going on in the other 500. You've got to do them all right. So really big focus on that. A lot of providers have been in trouble here, mostly because their data is wrong for not doing that well. I'll come on to fire because that's something that's changed a lot. And then electrical testing, there's a bit more flexibility in the regulations, but we would do a full test in a domestic setting, a sort of internal setting every 5 years. Communals every year is the obligation. And if we've got appliances in homes, then we'll test those annually. Asbestos is kind of obvious, but there's gradations of awareness through to, if you're actually going to tamper with something with asbestos in it, you need the right certification and training and so on. So we need to get that right. We've got a big asbestos register that tells us where we've got properties that have asbestos. So when we walk into a home, we know if there's asbestos present. Lifts you have to service every 6 months. Also from insurance perspective, that has to be right. So again, it's no good servicing 90% of the lifts. They've all got to be done. They've all got to be done to the requisite standard, and Legionella is water testing, particularly in older people's schemes, that kind of thing, where you've got a vulnerable client group. And we've got health and safety at work obligations, so there's quite strict obligations around how we treat our employees as well. So we need to bear that in mind. I think I've hinted at this, but if you've got to manage all that, you've got to have the right data, the right processes, the right policies in place. So quite a lot of overhead there in getting that right. And those data and process are sort of bound up in one another. If you've got bad processes, you'll probably have bad data. So a lot of emphasis on getting all of this right so that we don't have a problem. And there's a cultural piece as well. It's not just about ticking a box, it's about making sure people are safe. And that's the right mindset, I think. The pictures of Grenfell Tower, you probably recognise it from the news, you know, a complete catastrophe in our sector here. Almost certainly burnt down because of flammable cladding that the regulations may have allowed at the time. What it's led to is a complete overhaul of the way everyone looks at fire, particularly in tall buildings. And what we've discovered is cladding's the tip of the iceberg, and there's a load of other issues out there. Now, happily for me, Paradigm is not greatly affected by this, but for some organisations, their business plans have been torn up, and they're talking billions of pounds worth of immediate work, and it's things like compartmentation, so you know the stuff that stops fire spreading from one flat to another, wooden balconies, ventilation systems that don't work. Sometimes people have tinkered with the building in a way that's not consistent with the fire safety strategy, and everyone's looked at what we do, depending on the risk, you know, once, twice, 3 times in a decade, fire risk assessments, sometimes annually now, which is where you go in and take a view on the fire risk of the building. There's a huge debate about who's going to pay for all this. It's a multi-billion-pound problem, and if you happen to be a fire engineer in the UK, you're going on holiday somewhere nice when we're allowed to do so, because there is just not enough people out there to do the work. It's a massive issue on fire. I heard some of the stuff on carbon earlier. It's equally big issue. So the two things that are really changing here are those two. I won't go into all this detail, but there's basically 2 things going on. There's thermal efficiency. So how much does it cost to heat, principally in the home? We are likely to have minimum standards. We call them energy performance certificates over here. Minimum standards at sea level, which is a pretty decent level of thermal efficiency. As you can see, we've got quite a lot of properties that aren't at that level now. We're going to have to get them to that level or do something else with them by 2030. So that's the first thing. And we think in future we may need to go beyond C to sort of a level that really is very thermally efficient by 2050. And then the other thing is we're going to have to stop burning fossil fuels to generate the energy, the heat source. Now you can see heating times 94% gas. So 94% of our properties are not compliant with a zero carbon world. So a massive program of retrofit is going to be needed on our existing stock to change from gas heating to another heating. We're looking at air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps. There's some talk of green hydrogen over here replacing the gas we use now. No one really knows how it's going to work. I suppose the headline for me is this will come to you, I think. We're looking at it fabric first. We're going to do the thermal efficiency first because there's known technologies by and large, and wait for a bit more clarity on the heat source issue, because there's ample scope to sort of to buy Betamax and then ends up getting VHS and you've got a problem. So that's a huge issue. And if I just give you a kind of, I won't go into the detail of this, but this is a model that basically shows our 30-year business plan with one thing changed, which is the cost we envisage for zero carbon, which is the kind of orange line. So the previous plan assumes we build 500 homes a year. We can pay off all our debt if we wanted to by 2050. Once you put zero carbon in, the debt levels as a fraction of the asset base go up. And the difference is £1.4 billion worth of debt. So double the debt we've got on the balance sheet now is the difference between a zero carbon plan and a non-zero carbon plan. So it is a complete game changer if you're sitting on a load of historic assets, a complete game changer. And as I say, your position is slightly different, a lot more lease properties and so on, but I'd be very surprised if this didn't come to Australia in due course and create quite a big set of issues. Now, the next piece, which kind of pulls some of this together, is what we talk about as a strategy for each asset, which is basically about viewing each asset in the round, factoring in all the issues that one would need to think about to take a view on what to do with it. At a very basic level, you know, the choices are fix, sell, or regenerate. And in our case, the land values are such that regenerate is a serious option in some cases. And then we bring that together in a model, which is part of kind of financial appraisal. So you put in all the component life cycles and the costs of dealing with replacing roofs, windows, kitchens, bathrooms, etc., possibly lifts and other things depending on the asset. You put in reactive repairs costs or a view of what they're likely to be. You now put in something around zero carbon and how much it might cost to get to those levels. You take the rental income, you extrapolate from that a net rental income and come up with a kind of financial appraisal that gives you a net present value of the rental stream. In some cases, that will be negative now because of zero carbon. In those cases, we immediately say, well, should we sell it or should we regenerate it? In other cases, it will be more marginal. In other cases, the returns will be quite good. And then you do it again for market value because the opportunity cost of holding the asset is basically the money you could have got if you flogged it on the open market. So, and again, in our case, the values are very high. So we sell properties for, if we do sell them for very high values, there's all sorts of accounting issues in there, what's it on the balance sheet for. There's an issue about security and whether it's charged and what the security value is, which is a whole topic in its own right, as I say, regeneration. And then probably a tip from here, we've got properties, we've got some lease properties, or they're long-term leases, and we also lease properties to homeowners. You've got to understand the legals, so you have to understand the leases really well. If you're in a kind of part repairing responsibly position, which some of you are, I think, even more important, and you have to understand other legal issues like planning restrictions and other things that basically you've got to adhere to. So that legal view of the asset is really important, as is, last but not least, the view of residents. So we would take the resident surveys we do and sort of juxtapose those with the financial data to give us a view of whether the asset is working for the resident or not. And that would be a factor in our view of what we need to do next, whether how we invest or whether we divest in some way. So we're at kind of the stage of building that model. We've got a rudimentary version now, and that will drive our decision on what we do next with individual assets. And for houses and so on, we'll clone them, so we'll have typologies and try and do it that way. Now, I suppose one of the things I'd say about the English position is that, you know, there's a kind of traditional asset management here, which is do stock condition survey, and we do that on a rolling basis annually, work out what the component life cycles are and when they need to be replaced. Do things like making sure the communal boilers are serviced properly, make sure the compliance is all sorted out. And then there's the practical side, which Gary was talking about, organising all of that stuff. And that is still important, but we are going through a seismic change here. So the requirements around fire and building safety have just changed fundamentally, as is the kind of external scrutiny on those issues. So that's a big change. And then the zero carbon piece just changes the world, really. So you're into traditional asset management plus a load of stuff about commercial choices, about retrofit, about how to deal with fire risk, and a load of softer issues about residents. And a couple of speakers spoken about this. If I put an air source heat pump into someone's home who's on a modest income, the chances are it's going to cost them a lot more to heat their property, and it's probably a more complex bit of kit as well. So there's a whole range of issues there. Communal heating systems, we've got a lot of leaseholders that we expect to pay their share of upgrading. They're probably not going to be very happy about that. So there's a whole range of people issues here as well. And behaviours actually in the home, also really important. We're thinking about how we can engage residents and what sort of behaviours would help them save energy costs and so on going forward. I would say that we've got a significant skills shortage on a range of issues here, the strategic dimension, but also things like fire and zero carbon. We're at the sort of the foothills of trying to tackle those issues. Fit over the contractor base is building, but it's building slowly, and fire in particular, there's just a mismatch between the scale of the contractor base and its quality and what's needed. So for us, there's some big people issues, bringing in the right skills. We're beginning to train our own surveyors, put them through some professional qualifications. With commercial, there's plenty of crap, frankly, out there in the commercial world. So we're trying to build relationships with people we think we can trust over time. And then from a board perspective, the oversight of what we're doing next, both from a health and safety perspective and a carbon perspective, just needs to jump. And we're bringing new people onto the board. Also, the committee structure and so on has changed to try and deal with all of this. The final bit of our strategy is, what we've got now, we've sort of evolved over time. We need to do two things really. One is, what's our development strategy going forward? And we're much more choosy, I would say now. So we will operate within a specified geography. We've got restrictions on height. We've got a view on car parking. We've got a view on the standard kit, actually. And again, another tip is make sure the asset management function and the development function are joined at the hip. And some of it's quite prosaic. What boiler are we specifying? We need to make sure that the guys that we employ to service them know what they're doing and can get the parts to deal with. Lifts is a classic where if you get the wrong lift, you can only get the parts from Spain or somewhere. It's an absolute nightmare. So you kind of need to use the asset management knowledge you've got to inform your investment decisions going forward. And we're pretty picky about the legal restrictions we work under now. Obviously, we've got hurdle rates for commercial return and so on and so forth. So use the asset management experience to inform development would be my sort of tip on that. And then the existing stock base is not set in stone, and we've just done something that is the biggest stock swap the sector has ever seen with another organisation, where we decided we don't want to work in London in the medium term. They do, they want to do more. We are going to operate in those suburbs, in London. So we swapped assets. So just over 2,800 homes in total, about 300 million quid's worth of homes. We took 1,600, they took 1,200 of ours broadly. Massive due diligence process, lots of commercials and so on, but a game changer in terms of our pattern of geography. So we've now got a tighter asset base than we did have. It's about 2 months old actually, and it's working really well. And the residents are happier as well, which is certainly the feedback we came from our new residents is very good. So I suppose the point is that what you've got now it shouldn't be set in stone. You should think about it as an asset that is semi-liquid that you might trade in due course. And then very quickly, some conclusions. So I would always say, whatever else you're doing, you've got to get the health and safety right. And probably the second thing is you've got to have reasonable financial projections, because if you're building your financial plan on sand, then you can have a problem sooner or later. Data is key to all of that. We have data owners within the business, as you would budgets almost, that you've got delegated authority. You're responsible for the data set and the process that underpins it and the controls around establishing that data. So we kind of treat data almost as important as money now. As I kind of hinted strongly, zero carbon is a complete game changer, particularly for existing asset base. So look out for that. I think it'll come to you eventually. I think there's the risk of silos, you know, one team looking at zero carbon, another team looking at health and safety, another team looking at something else. If you're going to make good decisions on assets, you need to look at them, all of the issues in the round, including development potential. I guess that's why I'm saying there's opportunities as well as risks. There's scope to take assets that aren't great at the moment and turn them into something much better, driven by zero carbon, but actually we should be doing it anyway. And then my final thought is, and this comes from my regulatory time really, a lot of organisations don't really know where they're starting from, so they don't really know, you know, the legal status of their buildings, what's exactly in the lease, exactly what the components are, exactly what they need to do when. It's always a good question, I think. Do you really know where you're starting from? Frankly, my experience is that very few organisations really do. So I'll leave it at that point, Mark.
Yeah, no, brilliant, Matthew. There's a lot there to unpack, and it sounds like you're going through and your sector's going through some significant transformation. I was interested in your challenge in human capital, finding human resources do some of the function, because obviously you're not the only one competing for people with skills in fire management, for instance. So how are you going about that challenge of bringing those resources in to support your business?
Well, I'd be lying if I said it was easy. And there's a bit more, I mean, the sector here doesn't tend to collaborate that effectively, to be honest. There's quite a lot of competition. But there's a bit more talk of collaboration and organisations joining forces, partly to deal with that skills issue. So we're headhunting, frankly, for the, you know, the most senior roles, which is, again, not easy. There's not that many people out there. And you have to pay a competitive kind of market rate. And we benchmark our salaries to the wider market anyway. So that's part of it. And then in the UK, we have to pay an apprenticeship levy, and which creates a training budget that you can use yourself. And so apprentices is not the kind of 16-year-old learning to be a butcher anymore. There's a much more complex scheme than that. So we can kind of use some of that to give people degree level qualifications, and we're looking at growing our own to an extent. And then in terms of commercial partners, so we have quite a significant contractor base already. Our experience, I listened to the last speaker quite interested, is not sort of lie in bed with one partner only and let them sub out the work. There are great risks in that. You become very, very reliant on, you know, one commercial arrangement. So we tend to have 2 or 3, let's say, fire engineers. We've got relationships with 2 or 3 that we know pretty well. Those incentives are to sort of give us good service, because we'll keep coming back for more, but we keep some competitive tension, because otherwise folk can get a little bit complacent. I guess that's the summary of it. Yeah, it's hugely challenging, I bet. There's a question that's come through just on the back of your presentation too, Matthew. I'm not sure if you could see that, but so through from James Clough saying, are you applying different component specifications and life cycles, useful lives, depending on the future use of the asset? Up to a point. Given the sort of scale of our asset base, it's quite hard to get a really granular view of, you know, if is a lift in block A going to take, you know, more wear and tear than the lift in block B. So some of it is learned from experience. We almost do it the other way around, actually, in the sense that we will, let's say a roof, we've got a life cycle of 70 years. We've got markers where we're doing things, where the development department has come up with a sort of flat roof that we're concerned about. We'll put markers on the system to try and, you know, look at that earlier. We use quite a lot of data analytics to look at repairs. So if a boiler or a roof is getting a lot of repairs, there'll be a report that shows that we've got a prima facie issue here. That's relatively new. But we would validate before just saying, well, the roof is 70 years old. we'll replace it. We'd inspect it, and if it looks like it's got life left in it, we'll leave it alone. On the flip side of that, a boiler, if we're doing lots of repairs, it may well be that we replace it before the 10-year sort of life cycle is out. So it's more reactive than that, rather than, you know, a prognosis at the start of the life of the asset. But using data is really important. If you can get some mad situations where you keep repairing something that probably is at the end of its life. You spend a fortune on that and then decide to replace it at the end.
Yeah.
At our scale, the best way of dealing with that is to actually use data analytics to work out where the money's going and where the problem assets lie.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think the world's going to be screaming out for data scientists like they already are. So there's huge demand in that workforce. Just back to you, Gary. A few questions coming through just to wrap up your presentation too. One came through from Tony Fox, which is interesting, around do you ask your trades to meet deadlines for certain jobs? Example, a 4-hour time frame for urgent jobs. Also, what was your the weighting for your tenders? Was it mostly based on cost or service?
So the first part of that is, yeah, they were all bound by the KPIs. So it was, the response was your P1, 2 and 3, 4-hour commencement, 5 days finish, all that. So that was standard, and everyone was actually locked into that. They were then measured. So when we'd catch up and do reviews, we would pull out their performance and actually discuss that. So the second part of that question was in terms...
let me go back, mate. Sorry.
Sorry.
I've utilising this new skill. I have 2 things at once. It's not going too well, clearly. Also, what was the weighting for your tenders? Was it mostly based on cost or service?
No, it was actually, cost is obviously a factor, but because we didn't necessarily want the cheapest, we weren't holding each tenderer to their pricing. It really come down to their quality of, who they were, what they represented, their compliance, the confidence factor that they gave us that they could deliver what they were saying. And our experience has been cheapest, not always the best.
Yeah. Okay. Great answer. I'm just going back through some other questions. Again, if you've got questions, we've got about 6 minutes less with our panel, which is great. So if you've got any other questions, please shoot them through. I'm just seeing what else is sitting there. There's a covered that one from this was an interesting one, and it probably does talk to all our panelists today. At what Catherine asked this a bit earlier, what point in terms of portfolio size would you say you would have contractors locked into contractors, or just have them on the bench available to do any kind of work? Maybe Donald, we could start with you.
Oh, look, it's quite a tricky one. I think it depends on a number of factors, including like if your portfolio is, all together in one town or city, or geographically spread around. Look, I was just talking to an Indigenous housing provider in Queensland last week. They have about 200 and a bit dwellings that they look after, and they were on the edge of going to more of a contracted, tied-in environment. So, there's just one bit of anecdotal experience. I've seen quite a few organisations operating over 1,000 properties at sort of a do and charge environment, but in my view, that was never best practice. I'd say in the hundreds, and also depends on what if you're leasing properties from the government, and if you're having issues in a particular market with trades who really need your work. If in some places, like I'm in the mid-north coast of New South Wales at the moment, the trades are all saying they're very busy and don't really need to work for us. In that case, it's probably good to get them tied in.
Yeah.
So it's a whole lot of factors: market, geography, the works.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I might just go just to another one just really quickly, and again, one for you, Steve. And I know we talked about it and it came through as one of our takeaways from today. You know, the asset management, the one Uber system that will do everything for us. And clearly it doesn't exist, I think, by what you've earlier said. But a question coming through from Theo, is there a system that integrates well with SPM to do the holistic asset management service? What's your views on that?
Well, I'd love to say yes, that we've got experience with that. What we can say is that we have our APIs, and I think what we need is CHPs working together with their housing management systems supplier and us to just make it happen. It is really a three-way relationship, and yeah, it's a challenging one to get all three parties to kind of look at the bigger picture. I'd love to say that, that there is something coming. In some ways there is, but someone else might know of maybe another housing management system that does maintenance management that has more open, ready APIs.
Mm. Yeah, Gary, just from your perspective and experience, any other comment around that?
The system we use, which I did mention, promises to do everything, but it doesn't, and we're basically in a place where we're now actually about to hit the reset button and relook and see what's out there, because you can't just do strategic asset. My view is you can't just do strategic asset management without it connecting to your local day-to-day operational management, because it is so integrated, and whether it's one system, but the integration, as Steve has said, must be there. It's paramount. If it's not, it's a lot of double entry, a lot of waste of time, and then you run risks of data quality issues.
Yeah. Poor data in, poor data out. Absolutely. Any other comments? Just noting time, and we've covered a lot of information. Any other questions, or maybe from our panelists? Any other just final comments, and then I've just got a couple of things to cover off on.
Look, just Donald here again, that comment about, or the question about, is there one system? I have been involved with two recent searches, one with Compass and one with Mission, around looking for that ideal system. Neither of them found it. So at the moment, I'm still going with Steve's approach of its connectability of good systems. So you might get a finance and tenancy and transactional asset management system that works together, but the predictive model stuff doesn't seem to be highly worked out in those systems. So yeah, I think we've got to look at the best modules to put together. Yeah,
Matthew, I assume you concur. I saw you nodding there, so you concur.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite a difficult issue for us as well. We've actually got a sort of in-house system that we built ourselves, which is very good in some ways, but we're getting rid of because it doesn't. We're looking at digitizing services and it doesn't really connect to the outside world. We've just done a contract with some people called Civica that do have one integrated system. And basically over here, there's three routes that people are taking. There's trying to get, for the reasons that people have outlined, one system does everything, which the Civica allegedly does. That's what we've signed to. It won't be perfect. Some people are putting Microsoft and our Dynamics on top of their core systems as the one sort of CRM system, if you like, and repository of the truth. And some of the bigger ones here, one in particular, has tried to build its own from scratch, which kind of tells you what you need to know really about this. Is not really a done deal. The other thing I would say is we use data warehouse, which if you are coupling together systems, there's been loads of trouble here with sort of three versions of the truth. If you are coupling together systems, having one data warehouse that can compare and contrast the data sets from different systems is really, really helpful.
Yeah.
So we use something called Power BI, mostly for reporting purposes, but it's quite good as a data quality tool as well.
Yeah, no, brilliant. All right, well, look, I'm very conscious of everyone's time and getting you all the way on time. There's just a couple of things that I want to do. First of all, thank the panelists, Donald, Gary, Steve, Matthew. Thank you so much for you giving up your time this afternoon, and especially you, Matthew, getting up at at a very early start to your day. And I know you've got meetings later on in the day, and if you fall asleep in those meetings, you can blame the AHI for that. But we really appreciate your time today. I want to thank the 30 odd, 40 odd people that are on the call today, and we've got others who are registered who will get a copy of this presentation, so we'll get that through to you as well. I just wanted to give you guys this, just a little bit of a gift from us. Here's a link here. We've got an event in 2 weeks' time, 3-day learning event on leadership, innovation and culture. It's called the Inspire Summit. We've got some amazing speakers from across the globe, from the sector here in Australia, New Zealand. If you type in, if you're interested in attending that event, you can type into the discount code upon purchase the words Asset 2021, and that'll give you a 50% discount to that event. The event is 3 days. You don't have to be there for 3 days. Clearly, you'll get access, like you will today, to the recording of all those sessions post event. So there was a number of things that we wanted to get through today. Let me wrap up with those. Group 1 wanted an asset management workflow system, the Uber system. We've talked about that. I think that was a really good discussion. We talked about asset management plan and sticking to it. I think we did that. I think we talked well about tenants, but we could probably have a further discussion around what do the tenants want and need. We talked about being a reactive sector and how we can prepare ourselves for the future. I think there was a bit in that. We all share the same issues, absolutely, and this is great about this sector. Keen to share and learn. Lacking expertise in smaller teams. I think, Catherine, you mentioned that. I think that's something that we can continue to work on. And when you've got small resource bases, how do you know what to do and where to point those resources? Those were some of the takeaways from today. Some of those things we've probably dealt with in detail, others we've probably just touched on. So probably opportunity for further conversation around that. So again, thanks to everyone. Thanks to our audience over in NZ as well. I know it's late in your afternoon and evening, so thank you very much for that. Tony, I know you sent some things through on the Maori $28 million fund. We'll get that out to all the people on the call today as well. So thanks to everyone today, and have a lovely evening, rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Sure.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers everyone.
Thank you. That was great. Much appreciated.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Raylene.
Thanks.
You take care.
You too. Ta. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks you. Thanks, Rodney. All right. Gary, thank you very much too, mate. Sorry, I had to give you the hurry up there a little bit. We're just, time. We could have been speaking for ages.
No, it was a pleasure. Look, I hope it made sense.
No, it did.
All I heard was noise. I didn't